Can you hear? There's someone like outside my office in a meeting. I
No,
can't hear. Okay, cool.
no,
I'm glad.
no.
All right. So I'll start doing the intro now as people continue to come in. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our program, Pride of Place, Public Art and Historical Places. My name is Matt Schumann. I'm on the programming team at Cary Library. Before we begin, I just want to take a moment to thank the Cary Library Foundation. Their support enables us to bring programs like today's event to you. And this program is in partnership with LexCher and the Lexington Historical Society. If you have any questions, please submit them via the Q&A button. Carol Ward will answer questions at the end of the program. This program is being recorded and will be posted to the library's YouTube channel. Now I'd like to pass it over to Betty Gao from LexCher.
Thank you. Hello and welcome. I'm Betty Gao, a member of LexCher. Thank you to Cary Library for hosting this forum and for partnering with us for future speaker series events. And another thank you to the Lexington Historical Society for continuing to partner with LexCher. The mission of LexCher is to make the contributions of women visible in Lexington. We are an organization with a focus on women, but we welcome people of all identities. LexCher is working to establish a monument to honor Lexington women. Our town has many monuments and memorials, but does not have any monuments recognizing women. Lexington is the stage for a critical chapter in American history and democracy, but our public monuments only tell half of our story. So we are working to make our history inclusive and to recognize the important contributions women have made to Lexington. We use these speaker series forums to learn about the contributions of Lexington women and also to explore ways to visibly honor women through monuments and public art. In today's presentation titled Pride of Place, Carol Ward will help us explore how public art can create a dialogue with historic places. Carol is the executive director of the Lexington Historical Society. Carol is an art historian with a master's degree in art history and another master's degree in museum education. She's an author and has 20 years experience in profit and nonprofit management. Welcome, Carol, and thank you for presenting to us today. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Betty. So I want to thank both Cary Library and LexCher for inviting me today. I've spoken at LexCher's International Women's Day event, and that was a really great opportunity to talk about women in the arts in general and my experience as a female executive. And now we're going to just dive a little bit deeper into public art in historic settings. So let me share my screen and we'll get into it. And Betty, let me know if we can see this okay.
I saw it, now I can see it, yes.
Great, awesome. So as Betty's mentioned, I have about 20 years of experience in the for-profit and nonprofit art sector. As most of you know that are on here, I see a lot of familiar faces in the participant section. I recently just moved from New York City about 9 months ago. And so a lot of the examples that I'm going to be giving are from my experiences in New York City, and then actually looking forward to what the Historical Society is planning to do this upcoming fall and then in the future as well. As Matt mentioned, please put any questions in the Q&A section. Betty is going to be monitoring that. I will as well. And I will definitely answer any questions at the end of my talk. So I'm going to start off by talking about what is public art in general. And it's really interesting to me, the differences in public art. So the two examples that I have up on here kind of go from the ridiculous to the sublime. And you can see public art in pretty much all major museums around the world, around the country today. So many different museums are going into the public art sector to get new audiences in. So internationally, the image on the left is Jeff Koons's balloon dog in the Palace of Versailles. So talk about a historic setting and contemporary art and the juxtaposition between history and contemporary art. And that's a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, is how contemporary artists create a dialogue with the historic site that their art is placed in. Now, this can also lead to a lot of dialogue, as I mentioned, but a lot of debate. And sometimes this debate is positive, that it brings new context to both the historic art and the contemporary art. And sometimes the debate gets a little heated and people wonder if the contemporary art is right for that historic space. And that's okay too. The debate in the art world has been going on for centuries, and we love that conversation about where things go and why things are in certain places. So for example, with the Jeff Koons piece, he created all these huge scale sculptures, some that had already existed, some were site specific for the Versailles installation. And a lot of people didn't like it. A lot of people said that this is a very iconic tourism attraction, and are people going to walk into the Hall of Mirrors and expect a huge balloon dog? But on the flip side of that, a lot of new audiences came in specifically to see those pieces. So this is something that we always think about when we create contemporary art in historic sites. The example on the right is actually a picture that I took. This is at the Cloisters in New York City. And it's the story with the Cloisters is that the Rockefellers, as they did, brought all these medieval cloisters over to New York City parks. It's the medieval collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And as most people know, the Met does one major fashion exhibition a year, and they've been expanding it to also include the cloisters. So this was a couple years ago, pre-COVID, when they were doing a medieval themed costume exhibition, both at the main building on 80th and 5th, and then they actually brought it up to the cloisters too. So this is activating the space of the cloisters in a very interesting, unique way as well. And these fashion pieces are public art too. This is a case where the public art is part of the collection of the museum. So that's a little bit different than the Koons activation, where it is a temporary installation brought in by an outside artist. The Met always uses their collection to activate their spaces. But again, a little bit more subtle than Koons, right? It seems like it's a woman praying in this outfit, but it's a contemporary costume. Now we can also shift gears and talk about public art in the scale of different monuments. So we probably both know both of these examples. The one on the left is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, DC. And then a little bit closer to home is the Shaw Memorial in Boston. And so something that we're talking about here in Lexington is who gets memorialized? Who gets monuments? Where do these monuments get placed? Where is the pride of place for that? And how do these monuments actually reflect the spaces as well? You know, Maya Lin was very cognizant of the scale of her monument for the Vietnam veterans. As most people know, it actually gets kind of smaller as you walk through it with all the names, and very stark and very contemporary. And then the Shaw Memorial, much more traditional and much more kind of monumental, I would say, in the scale of it. Now, a monument that's got a lot of different layers to our conversation today is our women's pioneers in New York City in Central Park. So this monument was created by Meredith Bergman, who is the sculptor that has been selected for the Lex See Her Monument here in Lexington. And fun fact, this is the first monument to women in Central Park that are actually living women. So the two other monuments in Central Park that are really well known are both the Alice in Wonderland monument and Mother Goose. There was no monument in the whole of Central Park to women that actually were alive and present until a couple years ago during Meredith's sculpture that was unveiled right around 2020. And huge, amazing monument, monumental in size. The women are about 13 feet off the ground. So really you're communing with them in a very, very interesting way. So to back up for a second, a lot of what I talk about when I talk about public art and historic settings is why put public art in a historic setting in the first place. And so my career has mainly been in historic sites, now at Lexington Historical Society, and we're going to see some examples from the Morris-Jumel Mansion in a second. And an article that I wrote for an online publication called Museum Next a couple of years ago, I started the article with this definition. Static as defined by Merriam-Webster is something, quote, characterized by a lack of movement, animation, or progression. And so when I give talks about public art, historic settings, why historic house museums in particular have to kind of move forward into the 21st century, this is really what I start with. Because museums in general, historic houses in particular, are hurting. They can be very static. And I think this is something that we also can think about when we think about public art in any historic setting, is why are people coming back? And if you've got a house that interprets the Revolutionary War, in our case here in Lexington, the 19th century in the case of Morris-Jumel, you come see it once, and do you really need to come see it again? And so what I always say to people is public programming, exhibitions, public art are going to not only bring back your core group of constituents to try something new and see something new, but it also might bring a group of people that would never come to a historic site or a historic setting unless you did that exhibit, unless you included that public art. And I'll give some examples of that in a little bit. Now, we're on Zoom today. This would normally be the audience participation portion of the program. So feel free to put some answers in the chat if you're feeling brave. So if I was giving this talk in person, this would be a case where I would ask people to throw out some answers to these questions for me. What do we think of when we hear historic house museum? What do we think of when we hear public art? What do we think of when we hear contemporary art? And what do we think of when we hear community? And so there's good and bad answers to all these questions, right? We can talk about historic house museums being sacred spaces. We can talk about them being jewel boxes and treasures. But if you're not a general museum going audience, maybe they're boring, maybe they're dusty, maybe they only talk about dead white men. And so these are things that we're trying to figure out in the museum world. I just went to the American Alliance of Museums conference in Boston a couple weeks ago, and many of the sessions that I went to are how do we get new audiences into our museums? And this is all museums across the country, aquariums, botanical gardens, historic sites, art museums. How do we get new people? But then also, how do we really engage and activate our core group of constituents to really be ambassadors? And this public art is really something that I think we can dive deeper into in the museum sector to get people interested and engaged. And so what do we think of when we hear public art? Do we think of monuments like I showed you? Do we think of solely contemporary art? I could do a whole nother talk on historic public art. Public art has been going on for centuries. You think of the pyramids were public art. You think of 19th century public art in parks and gardens. And then of course you think of more contemporary examples as well. Murals are public art, and Boston has an amazing selection of murals. And we're working on a haiku project right now. That's public art here in Lexington. So there's all these activations available. Same thing with contemporary art, right? Contemporary art can be scary to people. Contemporary art is normally less representative than traditional art. It sometimes tackles difficult subjects about race and culture and different things like that, maybe groups of people that have been alienated before or minimalized. And so some people really like going to contemporary art museums like the ICA in Boston, and some people steer away from those museums because museums are a place of beauty and they want to go see the Monets and water lilies, and that's okay. But there's a place for everyone to go see different types of public art. And then last but not least, something that's always on the forefront of my mind is what do we think of when we hear community? And something that has amazed me when I've come here to Lexington is the community here is so active and so engaged with the history of the town and what it means to embrace that history and then also bring the history forward. And as Betty said, with LexCMER, make sure that everyone's story is told. So now I'm going to give you a few case studies from my previous job at Morris-Jumel Mansion. As I mentioned, I was there for 10 years, so a lot of the amazing things that I've done in my career have been through there. And so to give you the 5-second tour of Morris-Jumel Mansion, Morris-Jumel is the oldest house in Manhattan. It was built in 1765. 3 major time periods are interpreted to the mansion. Pre-American Revolution, the Morris family from 1765 to 1775. Then it was a Revolutionary War battle site with the Battle of Harlem Heights. So George Washington did sleep there, as he did many a place. And then the majority of the interpretation, especially after we did a major reinterpretation of the site, dates to the 19th century. And the main owner of Eliza Jamelle from 1810 to 1865. And this was a dramatic change from when the DAR first took the museum over in 1904. And then really all the way up through the 80s and 90s, it was the American Revolution all the time. But the majority of our collection at that site was 19th century and was really focused on the really strong female presence there from Eliza Jamelle. And she had been sidelined a lot. So it was important to me to make sure her story was told. And I love this image. It was something that a graphic designer did for me while we were celebrating the 250th anniversary of the house. So it seems like 250th anniversaries follow me around as I'm prepping the Historical Society for Rev 250. And it really is that then and now concept, that these sites are witnesses to history, right? So anything that we're talking about today, Morris-Jumel here in Lexington, these houses and these sites are going to outlive us. And so we really just want to be the stewards of our time there and do the best that we can to, again, tell those stories. Because for me as an art historian, it all comes down to stories. Any artwork, any house, any public art is really just a big story waiting to be told. And so I started at Morris-Jumel as the director of education and public programs, became deputy director, and then eventually executive director for the last 4 years I was there. And so it was a typical historic house when I started. We had a very small staff of 2. We had our school groups coming in. It was, as I mentioned, George Washington all the time. And then how did we really broaden the conversations? And to give a sense of what that looked like in the 10 years I was there, we went from 5,000 visitors the first year I was there to the year I left, we had over 35,000 visitors. And so that means that creating this public art and creating this more diverse programming has a bottom line issue as well. And I think that's something that I want to think about all the time here in Lexington. And with the public art conversations we're having here, is tourism is a big part of this conversation, and making sure that with this public art, you get new people coming in. We're so close to Boston here, and anything that we do with public art will just engage different people to come from far away. So as I gave the examples on the broad scale, I'm going to look a little bit at some exterior public art that we did, some of the pros and cons of what it was, some of the pitfalls that I ran into, because a lot of it is similar to what's going on here in Lexington and with Lex-See-Her, and then some interior examples as well. So Washington Heights is the upper part of Manhattan. If you know the musical In the Heights, that's where this house is. Lin-Manuel lives down the street from this house. And we were really cognizant of working with local artists, especially Latino-based artists. The house is surrounded by a 90% Dominican populated area, and 95% of that population is under the poverty line. So how do I engage with that group of people? So one of the first artists that we worked with, her name is Andrea Arroyo, and as I like to say, she is my big sister. She is an amazing artist, former dancer, and as you can tell, she's really interested in the female experience. And so she created multiple works for me, both inside the house, which I'll show you in a second, and then these works on the exterior. So these are all female figures, nude, inspired by Greek goddesses on the right, and then actually inspired by Eliza Jamelle on the left. And that piece was made out of canvas. It was hand painted by Andrea and hanging from the balcony. So literally the first thing that people are going to see when they walk up to the house and get ready to walk in the front door. So amazing, right? That we've got this public art, we're activating these outdoor spaces. The house is in a 2-acre New York City park, but there's some tricky parts to this as well. So it is in a New York City park, which means that the park itself was under the jurisdiction of the New York City Parks Department. So I had to get approvals based on sketches of Andrea's work from the New York City Parks Department, the Historic House Trust of New York City, and the Historic Districts Commission of the area, because we were in a historic district around the mansion as well. So a lot of hoops and red tape to get through, but really just explaining why we were doing this was really, really important to the process. Also, as I'm hanging something from a historic structure, I need to make sure that it is safe and secure. It's not going to fall on anyone's head. And that balcony is over 200 years old, and making sure that I'm preserving that as I go. And that was a really important partnership with the Historic House Trust as well. The other part of this, and I think this is really important with public art in general, is being aware of who's going to see it. So we had a lot of school groups coming into the park to tour the house. And so for the amount of time that this was up at the house, when we sent confirmation to those school tours, we did let them know that there would be nude female figures around the park, just so we made sure everyone was in the know and there was no surprises, because the last thing you want is any type of negative reaction to your artwork, just because people don't know what's going on. And what I found with all of the examples that I'm going to show everyone today is giving people more information at the outset and building those expectations of the public art is so key to any process of creating public art in a historic setting. So Andrea also created smaller scale works for me inside the house. And this was another situation of giving people plenty of information as they're walking around the house. There were nude female figures around as well. But then we actually had her create works that were going in or around our collections pieces. So I also have a curatorial background, and we also want to make sure that we're very careful about preserving these pieces. So the piece on the left was on Eliza Jamelle's dressing table. Eliza Jamelle was one of the first collectors of paintings in New York. She actually died the wealthiest woman in New York City in 1865. So this was a little homage to her art collection. And then the piece on the right is a watercolor by Andrea that's actually kind of sitting right on this 19th century trunk. So really careful installation of that, but again, activating the pieces in the collection. And this is a prime example. I joke that Andrea is one of the best PR people I have ever met. She does all her own PR. She gets all these articles written about her artwork, and we doubled our attendance for the time period that we had the artwork in the house. So again, not only activating the space, getting new audiences in, but really working with the community as well. Another example of this is a pretty cool exhibition that we did called The Loves of Aaron Burr. This was right before Hamilton kind of blew up. And these pieces are by a fashion designer. Her name is Camilla Huey, again, lives right in the neighborhood of Morris-Jumel, literally across the street, actually. And what she did was really extensive research on the 8 women whose lives intersected with Aaron Burr in one way or another, and created corsets. That was her specialty in fashion, was dresses and corsets. So she started with the corsets and then created these amazing sculptures inspired by these women that we, again, put inside the different rooms of Morris-Jumel. And so the image on the bottom right is actually Eliza Jamelle. Eliza Jamelle's second husband was Aaron Burr. So we had this dress with all the books kind of holding the dress up in Eliza Jamelle's bedroom. The image on the left is a woman who was actually one of Aaron Burr's mistresses, and they communicated by all these hidden messages in books. And then this kind of main showpiece on the top right was Theodosia Burr, his daughter, who was basically the keeper of all his letters, and dies in a shipwreck. Either the ship goes down by itself or it's overrun by pirates, and she drowns. And a third of his letters get lost with her when she drowns. And so it was this huge 8-foot piece that rested on the floor, backlit, that was almost looking like she was drowning through the floor. And as you can tell, I'm a big fan of telling women's history and the hidden stories of women. So this is why the partnership between the Historical Society and LexingTon matches so well as well. Again, huge exhibit to undertake, big budget, and also quadrupled our attendance. We got articles in Vogue and the New York Times, and people that were really interested in fashion that would never have come to the mansion otherwise. So this is my bucket list exhibit, as I always say. When I'm 90 and people ask me what are the top 5 things I've done in my career, I'm going to fill some of those things in with things that I'm doing at the Historical Society now. But the 2 big ones are working with Lin-Manuel on Hamilton, which is another talk for another day, and then working with this artist that these 3 pieces are from. So these pieces are created by an artist named Yinka Shonabare. He's a Nigerian-born British artist, and he world-renowned gallery represented in New York City. I'd seen a retrospective of his work at the Brooklyn Museum and said, you know what, I'm going to cold email his gallery and see if we can work with him. And the gallery very generously answered me almost immediately. And I said to them, you don't know me, you don't know Morris-Jumel Mansion, but I would love to work with you and create these pieces. So the 2 pieces on the right are from a series that had already been created. They were loans to the museum from a series called Mother and Father Worked So Hard So We Can Play. And this backstory with Yinka sculptures are he uses African wax print fabrics that would have been imported in the 19th century from Africa. And they were thought to be traditionally African, but they're actually not. They were mainly made for export from Africa. And all his sculptures are headless because he doesn't want you to focus on the identity of the sculptures. He wants you to focus on the feelings and the vibe that he's created. And these are children playing in 2 of the period rooms. So the bottom right is George Washington's room, and the top right is Eliza Jamel's granddaughter's room. And so those were loans that we asked for and we received from private collectors in New York City. The piece on the left was actually a commission. And so that is supposed to be the ghost of Eliza Jamelle, as she supposedly haunts the mansion to this day, and as an older woman. And again, this is the first time that Yinka actually created a sculpture based on someone who had been alive. So I included this for a couple of reasons. Again, public art activating a historic space, contemporary, spooky, all that good stuff. But I wanted to talk a little bit about commissions as we're talking about a commission here in Lexington. So commissions are really interesting things with public art pieces in historic sites or a historic setting like Lexington, because you kind of have to engage the artist before you have all the details worked out. So I was working with his gallery, we were chatting about the exhibition. In this case, as the museum, we paid the fabrication price for the commission. Eliza is still up for sale. If anyone would like to put her in her house, feel free to reach out to James Cohen Gallery in New York City. And so we worked with Yinka and his workshop because he actually has a degenerative spine disease. He has a workshop creating the pieces for him. So it was a lot of back and forth, a lot of iterations on what we really wanted from the sculpture, the look we wanted. It originally started off as Eliza as a young woman. Then we really wanted to honor her as an older woman. Then it was, do we include something, a secondary piece, which we did. This was the physical sculpture in her bedroom, but the secondary piece was inspired by the Empire style mirror that you see behind the sculpture. Yinka created what's called a Pepper's ghost effect. in a mirror in the front parlor, which was on the first floor. So as you walked into the house, in your peripheral vision, you saw her ghost very quickly pop into this mirror and then pop out. So it was a twofold installation, dealing with some technology, which was really cool. It was something that we had never worked with before, and then this sculpture as well. And so working with a commission, tricky, because Yinka was over in England, so he could not come back and forth and see the space. So we worked with his gallery representative, who did a lot of site visits, a lot of measuring, a lot of changing of location of where the sculpture was going to go, how she's positioned in the room, how the audience interacts with her, which I know is a big conversation with the Lexington monument. Basically, what kind of dialogue do you want that public art to have with your audience? And so it's all these things that you think about while you're creating this public art piece, that it's easy when someone walks in and sees this sculpture and just thinks it gets plunked down in that room, and there wasn't months and months and potentially years and years of planning ahead of time. This was an exhibit that we planned almost a year and a half in advance. Most expensive exhibit that the mansion had ever done, but was fully funded by the day that it opened. And again, almost tenfold increased our attendance based on it between the partnerships that we did. So what does this all mean for Lexington? So when I came aboard about 9 months ago here at the Lexington Historical Society, the amazingly engaged board of directors really was chatting with me about, we have these amazing historic sites, but how do we get new audiences in? How do we activate the spaces? And so what I did starting in January was we hired a new graphic designer, a new marketing consultant, to just make things a little bit more contemporary, a little more open to interpretation to new guests and new audiences. So this was an ad that we had placed actually for a fundraiser with Cal a few months ago. So same information that we'd been giving, but just a little more open and a little bit more contemporary in the styling of it. And as a lot of people on the call know, the major fundraising push that I'm doing right now is for the depot where I'm sitting right now. As people know, the depot is our fourth house, so to speak. It is a 19th century railroad depot that is basically a blank slate. And we have been very fortunate through some funding from the state rep, Michelle Sicolo, and a very generous private donation and our gala recently, that we're very close to our goal of fundraising to turn the depot into an education and exhibition space. And what that means is it's going to allow us to show more of our collection and the historic side of things, but also, as I'm rolling out the request for proposals for exhibition design firms, to make sure that we have some public art and contemporary art in the space as well. And the gallery that I worked with for the Yinka exhibit is already excited to work with me up here. So just stay tuned for those projects, probably in about a year and a half to 2 years. Closer to that though, is going back a slide. Coming up in September at Buckman Tavern, we're going to change out the exhibit that we have right now that we've partnered so well with Lexington on, Something Must Be Done. That's coming down at the end of August. And then a new exhibition about textiles is going to go up probably mid to late September. And we started off with the crux of that exhibit being our historic textile collection, which we have an amazing set of costumes, samplers, all different types of things. But what I really wanted to do is bring this contemporary art sphere into the society like I did with Morris-Jumel. And so we did an open call, which actually just ended the other day, for local contemporary artists to submit either existing or create site-specific works in textile arts for Buckman Tavern. So we're going to do two things with that. We're going to have the contemporary art intermingled with the historic pieces up in our second floor exhibition space at Buckman. But then we're also going to create some different installations in the period rooms at Buckman with those contemporary textile pieces as well. Now, again, similar to what I said with Morris-Jumel, they're not going to interfere with someone's visit to that historic space, because I know that's really important to people to see that as a whole, but it's going to create that dialogue and that juxtaposition. And this is the first time we're trying it, so we're going to do a lot of audience research and focus groups and see how everyone reacts. I want to give a quick shout out to our board president, Ann Lee, who has an amazing background in fabric and textile arts. And so she's helping me with the exhibit and helping me go through and jury the open call. So stay tuned for that. Everyone on this call will, I'm sure, get emails about the opening. And if you have not submitted to the open call and would like to do a last minute submission, feel free to email me. So I think as we go through all these examples of public art, both in New York City, in Boston, closer to home here, as we're talking about the Lexington Monument in Lexington, I think the big macro level things that we have to think about are bringing in new audiences, engaging the community, being open to what history means, and the fact that history is always changing. I think someone once said to me that as an art historian, you know, I talk about this type of art, right? And nothing ever changes. And that's not true. We're always learning new things about what went on in history. We're learning about new groups of people that maybe we didn't know about before, or learning new research. Prime example is us reinterpreting Hancock Clark House recently to include the enslaved population that had never been talked about before. And so really, we want to make sure that we build on this amazing foundation of the history of Lexington and just, again, further engage new people to tell new stories. And I think the Lexington Monument is just an added building block to telling these stories. Quick plug, this amazing book is going to come out in September. It is by a colleague of mine, Maria Auscherman, who very generously asked me to write the introduction. So if you'd like to learn more about specifically women sculptors, Meredith is featured in the book. And I would say about 90% of the women featured in here do focus on public art and either historic public art, and I'd say about 5 of them are contemporary public artists, quite a few from the Boston area. We're hoping to get Maria up here for a book signing and a book talk come the fall when it comes out. So be on the lookout for this. And then, as I always say, my door is always open. If anyone would like to come and chat with me about the Depot project, public art in general or specific, anything that we're doing here at the Society, or any questions about any past projects I've done, feel free to email me. My email is on the slide there. And then always just stop by the Depot as well. I'm normally here Monday to Friday, sometime between 9:30 and 5:30. So again, I want to thank everyone that's been on the lecture. And I know that Betty has left some time for Q&A, so I'm happy to answer any questions that have come up as I've been talking. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Carol. That was just fascinating and gave us so much food for thought, so many things to think about as we progress with our art initiatives in Lexington and with all of your great initiatives at Lexington Historical Society. One of the things that I thought about was what are some ways that you've measured the success of your public art projects?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think there's always this desire to quantify and qualify, right? And I was moderating a panel on public art about a week ago, and this question also came up, is I gave all these statistics about quadrupling our attendance and getting all this press, and that's great. And I think that's a huge way to measure success, because bottom line, it's like if the tree falls in the forest, does anyone hear it, right? If we do these exhibits and these programs and no one sees it, what's the point? So I think we always do need to have those statistics. That's important. And as museums, we do need to make money to keep the lights on. Another talk for another day is museums as businesses. That's another thing that I think a lot of people don't talk about enough. But then I also think we really need to dive more into the success of the community aspect and how integrated and how much does this community feel engaged in the public art. And I think sometimes museums are very insular. they live in their own kind of ivory tower bubble, and they don't engage the community as much. And I think I measure the success that way as well, Betty, of, you know, did the community come in? Did they feel engaged? Did they find some sort of connection? One of the best stories I always tell, again, from Morris-Jumel, and not so much public art wise, but just engaging, was a 3rd grade boy who had just immigrated from the Dominican Republic. We went down to the kitchen of Morris-Jumel, and all the kitchen implements he lit up because he recognized them from his grandmother's house in the Dominican Republic. And so it wasn't a case of being impressed by George Washington sleeping there, but he was making these personal connections. And I think that's a lot of how I measure success, is if people can make personal connections to the artwork they see.
Great, thank you. We have another question about talking about traditional art and contemporary art. Do you consider any public art that is made in current times to be contemporary, or how does the style play into how you describe contemporary public art? That was a question from.
Oh, that's a really good question. So, okay, I'm going to put my art historian hat on and say, by definition, any art that's made within the last 20 to 30 years is always defined as contemporary, because it's by someone who's living now. And we go sort of last 20 to 30 years as contemporary, before that 50 to 60 years is modern, and then you'd go to different time periods, right? So by definition, it's contemporary. That being said, you can then say, what's the style of it?
Right.
So for example, I would say that Meredith's style mostly is very traditional in the way that she creates her sculpture in bronze. She does a lot of bas relief, which is what the Lexington Monument is focusing on a lot. So you can have a contemporary sculpture being created within the last 20 years or so, but then it could be a traditional style. I know it gets a little tricky with the terminology. So you could see something like that Jeff Koons balloon dog. It's contemporary because it was created in the last 20 years, and it's also contemporary in style. Then you can have something like, I would argue, Andrea's work is contemporary because, again, she's created it within the last 20 years, but her style is actually very traditional in the way that she paints. The female kind of nudes that she creates is very almost Renaissance-like. So you can have both contemporary and traditional going on at the same time, and working hand in hand.
Excellent. And actually, there's another question from the attendees regarding just that. Like, can you speak about people's reactions when they saw the different styles of art, especially, you know, some of the ones that you expressed to us, or, you know, presented to us? You know, are there different perspectives about portraying women in the nude, for example? Did you receive a range of feedback?
Yeah, for sure. So yes, and you know, I just gave a couple of examples of what I did at the mansion. There's 10 years of contemporary art at that house, and you know, not every exhibit goes well. Not every exhibition is 100% well received. You know, you learn from your mistakes, and you learn from things that maybe didn't go as well as you thought they would. So what I learned along the way is a little bit what I said with Andrea's pieces, is giving people the information ahead of time. So one of the prime examples of not doing that was an artist that, again, lived uptown, great artist. His name is Pete Hoffmeister. I'm still friends with him. His sculptures were these amazingly huge installations, all about contemporary prison populations, GMO, very politically charged things. And they took up the majority of each of the rooms at the mansion. And we didn't do a good job letting people know what they were about to see when they walked in the house. So a lot of feedback with that was, I came to see an 18th, 19th century house, and all these sculptures got in the way of me really enjoying the Duncan Fife furniture. So that's what I learned with making sure things were up on the website, making sure that if there's school groups coming, saying, hey, we're going to talk about these rooms, but we're also going to be able to talk about these sculptures. And then to the specific question about Andrea's pieces, we did have feedback that, you know, there's female nudes around the house. And, you know, I had anywhere from third graders all the way up through high schoolers walking around the house. And I think it was really important to send those emails out ahead of time and let the teachers know. And then, you know, it led to conversations. And as a museum educator at heart, I always say I never want to talk down to kids. You know, having conversations with them about nude bodies and the nude in art and what that means and how respectful Andrea is. We could get into another topic of what it means to be naked in art versus nude in art, but that's again another talk for another day. So I think the bottom line is making sure that people have that information ahead of time. Okay. And also, oh, I'm sorry, Betty, and also being prepared for both positive and critical feedback. That's okay. You know, you're not going to make everyone happy all the time. And so it's okay if people express their opinions as long as they don't get, you know, aggressive or, you know, do anything that's going to harm you, your staff, or the artwork.
Yeah, so that's interesting. And that's a continuation of another question is like art draws strong reactions. What if somebody doesn't like it? Is there a single correct interpretation? And how do you deal with that?
That's also a really good question. So I always say there's not. You know, I've spent many a year getting various degrees in art history, and when I go with friends to museums, they want me to be the expert, right? And yes, I mean, I know more than them because I have the degrees and I've studied it, but I never really feel like there's one interpretation, especially as we start talking about contemporary art, that's by nature more likely to have more interpretations than Monet's water lilies. You can have a dialogue about it, and people can have differing opinions. That's okay, and that's good. I would much rather be leading a tour of people around an exhibition that has contemporary art and get 10 different opinions from 10 different people about what they think about it than them all be quiet and just listen to me. That's why I love doing different exhibitions, is engaging with people of different opinions. That being said, to the previous question, I think you are always going to get strong opinions. I mean, art is very subjective, and you know, there's museums that I go into and I go with my mom and she likes and I don't, or vice versa. There's pieces of artwork that I see all over the time that I could go for or I could not go for. You know, the pile of dirt on the floor representing, you know, climate change might not be my thing, but it might be someone else's thing. I really like 19th century Pre-Raphaelite art, which is very traditional and very based in mythology, and again, very female centric. Not for everyone. So I love having those dialogues, and I actually really like going to museums with people who are not museum goers, because I see things through fresh eyes. I just went to Peabody Essex a few weeks ago with someone, and he had never been there before, and his art world is music, and going with him and having this conversation about both traditional and contemporary art that we saw in the new American galleries that Peabody Essex installed, which are amazing. If you have not gone yet, you should definitely go. That was great because pieces that I had seen for years, I saw in a fresh light because he was seeing them for the first time. So I love that.
That is great. Well, thank you. I don't see any other questions, but thank you so much for your presentation and also for answering all these really interesting questions and continuing the dialogue. I just want to again thank Cary Library for hosting this, and especially thank Carol Ward and the Lexington Historical Society. You've been so great with partnering with LexCMER and partnering with our initiatives, including this ongoing speaker series. We will have another speaker event in July, but we also have a lot of exciting summer events happening. And one of them is the Summer Sew Along, which is a project supported by the Community Endowment of Lexington, where volunteers will be sewing 45 aprons that will be used for the August 27th spinning tableau. And so save the date for that, Saturday, August 27th from 1 to 3, where LexCMER is partnering with the Lexington Historical Society to create a historic tableau honoring the 45 Lexington women who held a spinning protest in 1769. So aprons have been an important item for women across time, and thanks to the Community Endowment of Lexington, We will be providing supplies and sewing tips and would love anyone who wants to participate to come in and join and help. You can pick up a kit and sew with us at noon for the next couple of Wednesdays in July. And we're posting all that information about the sew along and about the spinning tableau in August. All of that is at lexiher.com. And also at lexio.com on the opening page has information about our proposed monument by Meredith Bergman, which Carol has spoken to a little bit. That's on our website. And so please look at that. And if you're interested in finding out ways to support our monument initiative, ways to donate, or ways to get involved, I'm also going to put in the chat our email address. So if you want any information, you can contact us through the email. So thank you again, and so much thank you to Carol for this great presentation, and thank you, Matt, for hosting us at Carol Library.
Thank you, Betty, and thank you, Carol, for this wonderful talk. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.